This is theft. I'm calling security." The store manager's voice echoed through the upscale grocery store as shoppers turned their heads in shock. There, in the middle of aisle 7, stood 8-year-old Jaden Smith, tears streaming down her face, clutching a milk carton like it was the most precious thing in the world. "Please, sir, my baby brother needs milk. I promise I'll pay you back when I'm big." Jaden's voice cracked with desperation as she held up a handful of coins and crumpled dollar bills. The manager towered over her, his face red with anger, while curious customers began pulling out their phones to record what was unfolding. Some shook their heads in judgment, others whispered among themselves. But in the produce section, a well-dressed man in an expensive suit watched the scene with his jaw clenched tight. This was Jason Bond, a tech millionaire worth over $50 million, and something about this little girl's plea had struck him like lightning. Store policy is store policy. You can't just take items without paying. The manager continued, his voice growing louder as more people gathered around. Jaden's small shoulders shook as she looked up at him with pleading eyes. "I have some money," she whispered, opening her tiny palm to reveal exactly $2.37. "I just need 50 more cents. I promise I'll come back and pay you when I grow up and get a job," the crowd murmured. Some felt sorry for her. Others were annoyed by the delay. But Jason Bond? He stepped forward with purpose, his expensive leather shoes clicking against the polished floor. "What exactly is happening here?" Jason's voice cut through the tension like a knife. What this millionaire did next changed everything, not just for little Jaden, but for everyone watching. His response was so unexpected, so powerful, that it was talked about for years. But before I tell you what happened in that store, you need to understand how an 8-year-old girl ended up making a promise that would touch the heart of one of America's wealthiest men. If you're already hooked by this incredible story of kindness and hope, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell, because this is just the beginning of a journey that will restore your faith in humanity. But first, let me ask you this. What would you have done if you witnessed a child desperately trying to buy milk for her baby brother? Would you have walked away, or would you have stepped in to help? Let me know in the comments. This story started 6 hours earlier in a cramped apartment where responsibility fell on shoulders far too young to carry it. 6 hours earlier, in a rundown apartment building on the east side of town, 8-year-old Jaden Smith's eyes fluttered open to the sound of her baby brother crying. The morning sun barely crept through the thin curtains as she rolled out of the small bed she shared with 18-month-old Carlos, her bare feet hitting the cold linoleum floor. Her mother, Mary, was still fast asleep on the worn-out couch in the living room, her work uniform from the diner still clinging to her exhausted body. Mary had stumbled in at 2 a.m. from her second job of the day, and Jaden knew better than to wake her. At 8 years old, Jaden had learned that sometimes being the big sister meant being the adult, too. "Shh, Carlos, it's okay," Jaden whispered, lifting her baby brother from his makeshift crib. His tiny face was red from crying, and she knew exactly what he needed: milk. But when she opened the refrigerator door, her heart sank. The shelves were practically bare, just some old ketchup packets, a wilted head of lettuce, and an empty milk jug that mocked her with its hollowness. This wasn't new for Jaden. Every morning felt like a puzzle she had to solve. How do you feed a baby when there's nothing to give? How do you stay strong when you're just a child yourself? These were thoughts no 8-year-old should have, but Jaden carried them like invisible weights on her small shoulders. She remembered last month when her mother came home crying after being let go from her second job. "Baby, I'm trying so hard," Sarah had sobbed into Jaden's hair. "Mommy's working at the diner, the cleaning company, and now I got that weekend job at the gas station. But it's still not enough." Jaden had patted her mother's back that night, promising her everything would be okay, even though she didn't understand how. So every morning, when there was no milk, Jaden would mix water with a tiny bit of sugar and give it to Carlos in his bottle. It wasn't nutrition, but it was something. It was all she could do. But this morning was different. Carlos's cries were weaker, more desperate. He needed real milk, real nutrition, and Jaden knew it. That's when she remembered. The couch cushions. Sometimes loose change fell between them when her mother counted tips. She gently placed Carlos in his high chair and began her treasure hunt, digging deep into the couch cushions. A quarter here, a dime there, a few pennies scattered like hidden gems. Her small fingers worked frantically until she had gathered every coin she could find. $2.37. It wasn't much, but maybe, just maybe, it would be enough. Meanwhile, across town in a gleaming penthouse apartment, Jason Bond was starting his morning in a completely different world. At 45, Jason had everything money could buy. Italian marble floors, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, a kitchen that most restaurants would envy. But as he walked through his spotless home, something felt empty. The walls were covered with awards and business achievements, but there were no family photos, no signs of warmth or love. Just success, cold and impressive, but ultimately lonely. His phone buzzed with a call from his business partner, Matthias. "Jason, the Patterson acquisition is moving forward. We're looking at a $40 million deal. You'll be even richer by next month." Matthias laughed. "Great," Jason replied, but his voice lacked enthusiasm. Money had stopped exciting him years ago. He ended the call and stared out at the city below. Today, like every Saturday, Jason was heading to the grocery store. It was part of his routine, though he could easily have groceries delivered. Something about walking those aisles kept him connected to the world, to real people, living real lives. Back across town, Jaden was getting ready for her mission. She counted her coins one more time, whispering the amounts like a prayer. 237, 237, 237. She kissed Carlos on his forehead and promised him she'd be back with milk. The walk to Morrison's Market felt longer than usual. Jaden's small legs carried her past familiar faces in her neighborhood. Mrs. Henderson, her elderly neighbor, was watering her plants on the front porch when she spotted Jaden walking with determined purpose. Mrs. Henderson watched as Jaden continued down the street, her heart heavy with concern. She'd seen too many children in this neighborhood forced to grow up too fast. When Jaden finally reached Morrison's Market, she felt intimidated immediately. This wasn't the corner store she was used to. This was an upscale grocery store with shiny floors, bright lights, and customers dressed in clothes that probably cost more than her family's monthly rent. She noticed how people looked at her. A small black girl in worn clothes walking alone through their pristine store. Some glances were curious, others were judgmental, and a few were sympathetic. But Jaden held her head high and walked straight to the dairy section. The milk aisle felt like a maze of choices. Whole milk, 2%, skim, organic, non-organic. Jaden had never realized there were so many options. She found the cheapest gallon of whole milk and checked the price. $2.87. Her heart sank as she counted her money again. $2.37. She was exactly 50 cents short. 50 cents. Such a small amount to most people, but for Jaden, it might as well have been $50. She stood there, staring at that milk carton, willing the price to somehow magically change. Carlos's face flashed in her mind, his hungry cries echoing in her memory. That's when Jaden Smith, all of 8 years old, made a decision that would change her life forever. She picked up that milk carton, walked to the checkout counter, and prepared to make a promise that came straight from her heart. What happened next would test the kindness of strangers and reveal the true character of everyone watching. With trembling hands, Jaden approached the checkout counter, where Jennifer, a young cashier in her early 20s, was organizing receipt paper. Jennifer had kind eyes and a gentle smile that reminded Jaden of her kindergarten teacher. Maybe, just maybe, this would work. "Excuse me, miss," Jaden said, her voice barely above a whisper, as she placed the milk carton on the counter. She carefully laid out her coins and crumpled bills, arranging them in neat little piles. "I have $2.37, and I know the milk costs $2.87, but I promise I can pay you the rest when I grow up and get a job." Jennifer's heart immediately went out to this little girl. She could see the sincerity in Jaden's eyes, the way she had carefully counted every penny. Jennifer glanced around nervously, knowing what store policy demanded, but feeling every instinct tell her to help this child. "Sweetie, Jennifer started, her voice full of sympathy. She wanted to reach into her own pocket, to make up the difference herself. But she knew the cameras were watching, and her supervisor had already warned the staff about making exceptions. That's when Robert Stone appeared. The store manager was a man in his late 40s with graying hair and a permanent scowl that seemed carved into his face. He'd built his career on following rules to the letter, and he wasn't about to let some sob story change that now. "What's the holdup here, Jennifer?" Stone's voice cut through the moment like a blade. His eyes immediately fell on Jaden and the scattered coins on the counter. "Oh, I see. Another one trying to get something for nothing." "Sir, please." Jaden looked up at him with those same hopeful eyes that had melted Jennifer's heart. "My baby brother Carlos is only 18 months old, and he hasn't had milk in 2 days. I counted all the money I could find, and I'm just 50 cents short. But I promise, I swear on my mother's life, I'll come back and pay you when I'm old enough to work." Other customers in nearby lines had started to notice the commotion. A woman in an expensive handbag tutted under her breath, clearly annoyed by the delay. An elderly gentleman craned his neck to see what was happening. A young mother with her own children watched with growing concern. But Stone's expression didn't soften one bit. If anything, it hardened. "Little girl, rules are rules. No exceptions. You can't just take merchandise because you have a sad story. Everyone has problems." "But sir," Jaden's voice grew more desperate. "I'm not trying to steal anything. I'm trying to pay. I have most of the money, and I promise I'm good for the rest. My mommy always says promises are the most important thing we have." The crowd was growing larger now. Some people were pulling out their phones, others were whispering among themselves. Jennifer stood frozen behind the register, torn between her job and her conscience. "I could work for you," Jaden continued, her 8-year-old mind racing for solutions. "I could sweep floors or organize things. I'm really good at cleaning up. My mommy says I'm the best helper she's ever seen." Stone's face reddened with embarrassment. Here was this little girl, making him look like a villain in front of a growing audience of customers. His voice grew louder, more aggressive. "This is not a charity. This is a business. You cannot work here. You're a child, and you cannot take products without paying full price." The emotional pressure was becoming too much for Jaden. Her small body began to shake and tears started streaming down her face. "My brother is hungry, please," she cried out, her voice echoing through the store. "He's just a baby and he's hungry, and I don't know what else to do." The crowd's reaction was mixed and telling. Some people felt genuine sympathy. You could see it in their faces, the way they leaned forward, wanting to help. Others, however, were clearly annoyed by the disruption to their Saturday morning shopping. A man in a business suit checked his watch impatiently. A woman with perfectly styled hair shook her head as if this was somehow Jaden's fault. Jennifer's eyes filled with tears as she watched this little girl's heart break. She wanted so desperately to help, to reach into her own wallet, but she knew Stone was watching her every move. She'd already been written up twice this month for minor infractions, and she couldn't afford to lose this job. Stone, feeling the pressure of the crowd and the cameras from phones now recording, decided to escalate the situation. "If you don't leave this store immediately, I'm going to call the police. This is attempted theft, and I won't tolerate it." The word police sent a shock through Jaden's small body, but even in her fear and humiliation, she maintained her dignity. She wiped her tears with the back of her hand and looked Stone directly in the eyes. "I'm not trying to steal anything, sir. I'm trying to do the right thing. I'm trying to feed my baby brother." Across the store, Jason Bond had been watching this entire scene unfold from the produce section. Every word, every gesture, every moment of this confrontation was hitting him like physical blows. His hands were clenched into fists at his sides, his jaw tight with emotion he hadn't felt in years. Jason's internal struggle was visible on his face. Every instinct told him to walk away, to not get involved, to let store policy handle this situation. But his heart was screaming at him to act. That's when Jaden made her final, desperate plea. She looked up at Stone with tears streaming down her face, her voice cracking with emotion, and said the words that would change everything. "I promise to pay when I grow up. I swear it on everything I love. Please, sir, please let me have the milk for my brother." The store fell silent, except for the hum of the refrigerators and the distant sound of shopping carts. Everyone was watching. Everyone was waiting to see what would happen next. And that's when Jason Bond made his decision. He stepped forward, his expensive shoes clicking on the polished floor, his presence commanding immediate attention. His voice was calm, measured, but carried an authority that made everyone turn to look at him. "What seems to be the problem here?" Jason asked, though he'd heard every word of the confrontation. Stone immediately assumed this was just another complaining customer. "Sir, please step back. This is a store matter, and we're handling it according to policy." But when Jason spoke again, there was something in his voice, a quiet power, an unmistakable authority that made Stone pause. Jason looked down at Jaden, who was staring up at him with a mixture of hope and fear in her eyes. "How much does she need?" Jason asked simply. Stone's chest puffed up with indignation. "Sir, it's not about the money. It's about principle. We can't just let people take things without paying full price, or every person with a sob story will expect the same treatment." The crowd held its breath, waiting for Jason's response. Cameras were still rolling, capturing every moment of this confrontation. And Jason Bond, millionaire businessman, looked Robert Stone directly in the eyes and said something that shocked everyone in that store. If this story is touching your heart and you want to see how this incredible encounter unfolds, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because what Jason says next will completely change how you think about kindness and second chances. What happened next would not only save Jaden's day, but would teach everyone watching a lesson about what principles really mean. "You're absolutely right about principles." The entire store seemed to hold its breath as Jason Bond's words hung in the air. "You're absolutely right about principles." But what he did next shocked everyone who thought they knew where this was heading. Jason slowly knelt down until he was at Jaden's eye level, his expensive suit touching the cold grocery store floor. In that moment, this millionaire tech mogul became something else entirely. He became someone who understood exactly what this little girl was going through. "Tell me about your brother," Jason said softly, his voice gentle and genuinely interested. Jaden wiped her tears with the back of her small hand, surprised by the stranger's kindness. "His name is Carlos, and he's only 1.5 years old," she began, her voice still shaky but growing stronger. "My mommy works 2 jobs to take care of us. She works at Miller's Diner on weekdays, and on weekends, she works at the gas station on 5th Street. The crowd that had been murmuring and restless just moments before grew completely quiet, drawn into this unexpected conversation. Even the impatient businessman who had been checking his watch was now listening intently. "My mommy tries so hard," Jaden continued, "but sometimes there's just not enough money for everything. When there's no milk, I give Carlos water with a little sugar in it. But he's been crying more, and he's getting skinny. I know he needs real milk, real food. That's why I had to come here today." Jason listened with the kind of attention that made Jaden feel like she was the most important person in the world. His eyes never left her face, and she could see something in his expression: understanding, pain, recognition. It was as if he was seeing himself in her story. "What's your name, sweetheart?" Jason asked. "Jaden Smith, sir," she replied, standing a little straighter despite her tears. Jason smiled, the first genuine smile many of these customers had seen from him. "Jaden, I want to make you a deal." The crowd leaned in closer. Even Stone, who had been ready to call security, found himself curious about what this well-dressed stranger was about to propose. "You can have the milk," Jason continued, "but I need something from you." Jaden's eyes filled with cautious hope. After everything that had just happened, she was almost afraid to believe that help had actually arrived. "What do you need, sir?" Jason paused for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of his own childhood memories, his own struggles, his own dreams that had once seemed impossible. "I need you to promise me something bigger than paying me back," he said. The crowd was confused now. They had expected him to ask for money or contact information, or maybe some kind of favor. But this was something entirely different. "Promise me," Jason continued, looking directly into Jaden's eyes, "that you'll never give up on your dreams. No matter how hard things get, no matter how many people tell you it's impossible, Promise me, you'll keep believing in yourself and keep working toward the life you want." Jaden's 8-year-old mind struggled to understand the full weight of what he was asking, but she could feel the importance of it. I promise, sir. But I don't know what my dreams are yet." Jason's smile grew wider. "That's okay. You'll figure them out. The important thing is that when you do, you don't let anyone or anything stop you from chasing them." "I promise," Jaden said with more conviction this time. Jason stood up and walked to the register where Jennifer was watching with tears in her eyes. He pulled out his wallet, a leather billfold that probably cost more than most people's monthly grocery budget, and placed a $20 bill on the counter. "The milk, please," he said to Jennifer, who rang it up with shaking hands. But Jason wasn't done. As Jennifer handed him the receipt, he turned back to Jaden. "Tell me more about your mother's situation. You mentioned she works 2 jobs?" Jaden nodded eagerly, sensing that this conversation was somehow important. "Yes, sir. But we still might have to move because we got a paper that says we have to pay more money for our apartment or leave. And sometimes the lights get turned off when Mommy can't pay the electric bill." Jason's expression grew more serious. The crowd continued to listen, many of them realizing they were witnessing something extraordinary. "What's your mother's name?" Jason asked. "Mary Smith," Jaden replied. Jason nodded and then did something that surprised everyone even more. He walked over to Robert Stone, the manager who had been so rigid about store policy just minutes before. "Mr.?" Jason began. "Stone. Robert Stone," the manager replied, his earlier aggression replaced by curiosity and perhaps a hint of embarrassment. "Mr. Stone, I'd like to set up an account for the Smith family. I want to put a monthly credit of $500 that can be used for groceries only. Can you arrange that?" Stone's eyes widened. $500 a month was more than many families spent on groceries, and this stranger was offering to pay it for a family he'd just met. Yes, sir. I can set that up, but may I ask who's guaranteeing this account?" Jason reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a business card. When Stone read it, his face went pale. Jason Bond, CEO of Bond Tech Industries. Stone had heard of Bond Tech. Everyone in the city had. This wasn't just some wealthy customer. This was one of the most successful businessmen in the state. "Set up the account under Mary Smith's name," Jason instructed, "and make sure your staff knows that the Smith family is to be treated with the same respect you'd show any valued customer." Stone nodded vigorously, his entire attitude transformed. "Of course, Mr. Bond, absolutely." Jason then walked back to Jaden, who was watching all of this with wide, uncomprehending eyes. He knelt down again and handed her a business card. "Jaden, this has my phone number on it. In about 10 years, when you're ready for your first job, I want you to call me. And I want you to tell me about all the dreams you've discovered and all the things you want to accomplish." Jaden took the card with trembling hands, staring at it like it was made of gold. "You really mean it?" "I really mean it," Jason said. "But remember your promise. Never give up on your dreams." The tears that had been tears of desperation and humiliation just minutes before were now tears of overwhelming gratitude and disbelief. "Thank you," Jaden whispered. "Thank you so much." The crowd that had gathered was no longer the same group of judgmental shoppers and impatient customers. Something had shifted in the air. People were looking at Jaden differently now, not as a problem to be solved or an inconvenience to be endured, but as a little girl who had shown remarkable courage and dignity in the face of adversity. Some were wiping tears from their own eyes. Others were pulling out their phones not to record drama, but to capture and share this moment of unexpected kindness. The woman with the expensive handbag who had been tutting disapprovingly earlier approached Jaden and quietly pressed a $10 bill into her hand. "For your brother," she whispered. Jason stood up and looked around at the transformed crowd, then back at Jaden, who was clutching her milk and the business card like treasures. "Sometimes," Jason said loud enough for everyone to hear, "the best investment isn't in stocks or real estate or technology. Sometimes the best investment is in people. In believing in someone when they can't quite believe in themselves yet." He paused and looked directly at Robert Stone. "And sometimes, Mr. Stone, the most important principle isn't following rules. It's remembering that behind every rule should be a desire to help people, not hurt them." Stone nodded, his face red with what was no longer anger, but shame and perhaps a new understanding. Jason turned back to Jaden one final time. Go take care of your brother. And remember, dreams aren't just wishes, they're promises you make to yourself about the person you're going to become. As Jaden walked toward the store exit, clutching her milk and surrounded by the warmth of strangers who had become invested in her story, nobody in that store was the same person they had been 15 minutes before. But this incredible story was far from over. What happened when Jaden returned home would create ripples that would extend far beyond one family's struggle and far beyond one millionaire's act of kindness. Jaden's small legs had never moved so fast as she raced home from Morrison's market. In her arms, she carried not just the gallon of milk that had started this whole incredible journey, but bags of groceries that Jason had quietly added to her order. Fresh bread, peanut butter, bananas, eggs, and even a box of Carlos's favorite baby cereal that she had mentioned in passing. Her heart was pounding with excitement and disbelief. Had that really just happened? Did a complete stranger really just change her family's life in the span of 15 minutes? As she burst through the apartment door, Carlos was still in his high chair, but his weak cries immediately turned to squeals of joy when he saw his big sister return. His tiny hands reached out toward her, and Jaden could swear he somehow knew that everything was about to get better. "Carlos, look what Sissy got you," Jaden exclaimed, rushing to pour fresh cold milk into his bottle. The sight of the white liquid filling the bottle brought tears to her eyes again, but these were different tears. These were tears of relief, of joy, of hope fulfilled. The sound of Carlos's happy babbling woke Mary from her exhausted sleep on the couch. She sat up groggily, her waitress uniform wrinkled, her hair disheveled from another late night at work. But when she saw the abundance spread across their small kitchen table, she thought she was dreaming. "Jaden, baby, where did all this food come from?" Mary's voice was filled with confusion and growing alarm. Her first thought was that her daughter had done something dangerous or wrong. Jaden's words tumbled out in a breathless rush of excitement. "Mommy, there was this nice man at the store, Mr. Jason, and I didn't have enough money for Carlos's milk. But then the manager was being mean, and Mr. Jason came over, and he was so kind, and he paid for everything, and he said I have to promise to never give up on my dreams, and he gave me his card, and he set up an account so we can get groceries every month. And—" "Slow down, baby," Mary interrupted, her mind struggling to process what she was hearing. "Someone paid for groceries? Set up an account? Jaden, are you sure this really happened?" Jaden pulled out Jason's business card and the receipt from their grocery transaction. Sarah's hands shook as she read the name. Jason Bond, CEO of Bondtech Industries. Even working 3 jobs and barely having time to watch the news, she knew that name. Everyone in the city knew that name. That's when the tears began. Mary sank into one of their mismatched kitchen chairs and sobbed. Not tears of exhaustion or worry for the first time in months, but tears of overwhelming relief and gratitude. For so long she had carried the weight of their struggles alone, working herself to the bone and still falling short. Now, a stranger's kindness had given them hope. "Mommy, don't cry," Jaden said, wrapping her small arms around her mother's shoulders. "The nice man said it's going to be okay." And for the first time in a very long time, as they sat together at their small table, sharing a real meal with fresh bread and milk, it felt like maybe it really would be okay. Meanwhile, back at Morrison's market, the effects of what had just happened were spreading like ripples in a pond. Jennifer, the young cashier, kept glancing at Jason's business card that he had quietly slipped to her, along with a note that read, "If you ever want to work for a company that values kindness, call me." She had been working retail for 3 years, barely making ends meet, constantly told to follow policy over compassion. But watching Jason's interaction with Jaden had shown her that business could be different. Companies could be different. She tucked the card safely into her wallet and made a mental note to research Bondtech Industries when she got home. Even Robert Stone, the manager who had been so rigid about store policy, found himself changed by the experience. As he processed the monthly grocery account setup, he couldn't stop thinking about Jason's words. Sometimes the most important principle isn't following rules. It's remembering that behind every rule should be a desire to help people, not hurt them. Mrs. Henderson was watering her plants when she saw Jaden practically skipping down the street, arms full of grocery bags, her face glowing with happiness. The elderly woman had lived in this neighborhood for 40 years, and she knew the look of a miracle when she saw one. She didn't know what had happened at that store, but she knew something beautiful had occurred. The customers who had witnessed the scene couldn't stop talking about it. Videos began appearing on social media with captions like, "Millionaire's kindness restores faith in humanity," and "8-year-old's promise moves CEO to tears." The story spread from Facebook to Twitter to TikTok, reaching thousands of people who needed to be reminded that kindness still existed in the world. By Monday morning, local news stations had picked up the story. Millionaire CEO Jason Bond surprised shoppers at Morrison's Market this weekend when he helped a young girl buy milk for her baby brother. But what he did next has the whole city talking about the power of believing in people. The story resonated because it reminded people of something they had almost forgotten, that individual acts of kindness could change lives, that success meant nothing without compassion, and that sometimes the smallest gestures create the biggest impact. 6 months later, the transformation in the Smith family was remarkable. With the security of monthly groceries and Jason's help connecting Mary to better employment opportunities through his business network, Mary had been able to quit one of her jobs and take a position with benefits at a local medical office. But the biggest change was in Jaden herself. With her basic needs met and the confidence that came from knowing someone believed in her, she was excelling in school like never before. Her teachers noticed her increased participation, her improved grades, and most importantly, her newfound sense of possibility. One evening, Jaden sat at their kitchen table, the same table where they had once worried about having enough food, carefully writing a letter in her best 8-year-old handwriting. "Dear Mr. Jason, I wanted to tell you that I am keeping my promise about dreams. I decided I want to be a doctor so I can help kids like Carlos when they're sick. My teacher says I'm really good at science, and my mommy got a job at a doctor's office, so now I know what doctors do every day. I think this might be my dream. Thank you for believing in me before I even knew what to believe in myself. Love, Jaden Smith." P.S. Carlos says thank you too, but he just says it in baby talk. When Jason received that letter in his downtown office, surrounded by awards and business achievements that had once defined his success, he smiled in a way his employees had never seen before. This 8-year-old's letter meant more to him than any acquisition, any profit margin, any business deal he had ever completed. The letter reminded him of something he had forgotten in his climb to success: that wealth without purpose was empty, that success without service was meaningless, and that the best investments really were in people. Remember, true kindness creates ripples that last forever. You never know when your moment to be someone's Jason Bond will come. When it does, will you be ready to change a life? If this story has touched your heart and reminded you of the power of kindness, please subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell. Share this story with someone who needs to be reminded that good people still exist, and that one act of compassion can change a life forever.